Take it there, who gon' take it there, who gon' take it there, who gon' take it there? Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air. It's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility.
So I want to talk about the situation that's going on with David Hogg, who is a member of the DNC. Some of you might remember that he was an activist who got into Democratic Party politics after a school shooting at his school. He wasn't there for the shooting itself, but he was at the school at the time and knew some people involved or something like that. But, I mean, even if he did, and even if he was completely removed from it, it's still a traumatic thing to have something like that happen at your school, and it spurred him to get into politics. So he's had kind of a mixed track record. He seems to have been pulled kind of in the wrong direction at various points in his political career. At one point, I remember he tried to start a rival pillow company to the My Pillow guy because he was like, well, if this guy can start a pillow company that's successful, then I can do it. And, you know, that's how we compete on the marketplace. If we want him to have less influence, we beat him in the marketplace of pillows, and then he won't have as much of a voice. So that failed and was kind of a weird thing, and people called that out for being a grift at the time. But I think for the most part, he's a kid who's trying to figure out the right way to have influence, and definitely like sees some problems with the Democratic Party, some things he wants to be different. Not in every case are they things that I would necessarily agree with. I don't think I 100% agree with his politics, but I think for the most part, he comes out on the pretty much the progressive side of things. And that's essentially what he's doing here that has caused such a stir within the Democratic Party, where he is, in his words, challenging the status quo. And so now there's this procedure that he views as being leveraged against him to remove him from the DNC because he essentially threatened their power. So I'll get into all that. The media has talked about this a decent amount, so people know about this, but it's a little bit more complicated than it seems. There are layers to it, and I think if nothing else, it's a good example of like how Democratic Party politics works and why it's flawed and why they get themselves so bogged down with nonsense. And this is like definitely an example of that. And in some respects, I guess it's just like classic intra-party fighting, except for the fact that David here, at least, you know, as is claimed by some people, he's doing something that hasn't been done within the Democratic Party, which is starting a pack to oust incumbents who are, in his words, asleep at the wheel, or people who are old, have been in their position for a long time, do not represent change, and are in safe districts, because that is essentially how people are able to remain entrenched in power, is if you're a Democrat in a safe district, and so you keep your position for years and years, nobody ever challenges you, and it essentially has led to a lot of the Democratic Party being ineffectual, being too old to do their jobs. Jerry Connolly just had to step down from his position, the top oversight position, because of an illness that everybody knew he had, and this was like just a few months ago that he accepted this position. Like, why? So it doesn't take that much foresight to say like, okay, this obviously isn't going to last long if we put you in this position, so let's not waste time. But that's simply not how the Democratic Party works. The party would rather focus on seniority, people who have been around a long time, and offering those positions to people who have like so-called earned their spot. And I mean, this mentality goes all the way up to the top. That was the mentality with Hillary Clinton, that she earned her spot. She went up against Barack Obama. Then, you know, she lost to him in the primary, and you know, once 2016 rolled around again, it was her turn, and same kind of with Joe Biden. So that's just how the party likes to operate, and it has put the party in this position where it's all these geriatrics who are not relevant. They don't really have their finger on the pulse of politics. They're good enough at serving their district that they keep getting reelected, but a lot of them are in safe positions, and so those Democrats who are in safe seats, who have been around forever, are the ones who are like literally grandfathered in to certain positions. So David Hogg is challenging that. He made an announcement that he was going to start primarying Democrats in safe districts who had been there forever, incumbents who weren't getting a lot done and were standing in the way of progress in the party. He wanted it to have a bit of an electrifying effect. He knew that this was going to be something that would roil the party, and he wants to do it through this PAC that is aimed at essentially propping up progressives in primary challenges. And again, these are in safe districts, so not districts that could be lost to Republicans, but rather ones where Democrats have been incumbent for a long time. So based on the way that he describes it, what's happening now is that the election that allowed him his spot as vice chair of the DNC, which is one step below the chairman of the DNC, and there's 5 of them, and him and one other guy, who we'll talk about in a little bit, were elected into this position as vice chair of the DNC, and then now they are going to hold a procedural vote of the entire DNC, all the DNC members, of whether to allow David Hogg to stay in the party. So there have been some procedures that have started moving, but the vote has not happened yet. So David Hogg is not kicked out of his position yet. But what he's saying about it is that they are doing this because of his announcement about this PAC that was going to challenge incumbent Democrats. So there's reason to believe that, and I mean, it seems obvious from the outside perspective. Now, there are other things going on here, though, and other people who are piping up who have a different perspective on what's happening. So essentially, this is a complaint about the procedure of the election that got David Hogg and one other guy elected to the board. And so the procedural complaint that is lodged it's not against David Hogg or anything that he did, but it's about the procedure of the election. And it has nothing to do with whether or not David Hogg is a good little DNC member. It's about some kind of weird rule that the Democratic Party has, basically a weird claim that this certain member is making about what the rules require. And so that is where there could potentially be a revote. And what's happened so far is that the committee that basically looks at these challenges to the rules then decides if the entire DNC should vote on this. So the complaint that was lodged essentially says that David Hogg and the other guy that he got elected with, which is Malcolm Kenyatta, essentially the election that got them in was unfairly biased towards men. And so there are DNC rules that say that they have to take measures to make it so that the body is representative of women in an equitable way. But what this person is arguing, her name is Kaylin Free. She was a DNC member in Oklahoma. And essentially what she's saying is that every DNC member had to cast 5 votes in this particular election because there are 5 seats. And so what she's saying is that they should have been required to split their ballots between women equitably, men and women equitably. So, in other words, because of the fact that the DNC rules state that they will make elections equitable internally, that means that they should have had a requirement that makes it so that there has to be a split between men and women in the final results of the election. That is her complaint, as I understand it. So that went to the committee that decides whether these complaints are valid, and that committee did decide that the complaint is valid, and so that is why the election is potentially going to be nullified if the rest of the DNC votes in favor of that. So it's a weird complaint. That is an odd claim that she's making, and I do not think that they should nullify the election on those basis. However, if you're talking about, making things more equitable, the question of how to do that in the voting process is a fair question. I think that is an odd request to make of how that election process should go down. And I feel like that's the kind of thing that people get annoyed with Democrats about, because while it might make theoretical sense from an equitability perspective, from a feminist perspective, that you want to make sure you have to take measures to make sure that the results are equitable. If those measures amount to telling people who they have to vote for in some sense based on gender, that's odd and not the kind of voting game that your average person really would want to participate in, I would think. So I don't think that that's what the DNC should be basing their rules on. So again, they haven't decided that is a legitimate cause to nullify the election yet, but they could. So the other aspect of this is that this other representative, Malcolm Kenyatta, who was also elected with David Hogg at the same time, so he's also a vice chair, they both won. What he is claiming is that the media is making David Hogg the star of this story and turning it into a narrative about how David Hogg is going against the party, and the party is bucking him and trying to force him out. He's saying that that's the narrative that the media has coalesced around and that David Hogg has purposely perpetuated. But really what's going on is more complicated than that, and that's where I don't understand. He has made a decent amount of noise about the fact that he thinks this narrative is unfairly tilted towards David Hogg. However, I kind of don't understand what his intentions are there. I think what he's trying to do is distance himself from David Hogg and point out the fact that it's unfair for him to be lumped in with him on this, like he's not trying to go against the party in the same way that David Hogg is. However, this vote that they're trying to use to overturn David Hogg's election would also overturn Malcolm Kenyatta's election, and they would both be out. So that's why I don't really understand what the point of splitting the hairs in the way that he's trying to do is, because if there's more support for David Hogg not being forced out, then that's going to mean there's more support for him not being forced out. But I think he's trying to appeal to the fact that this is about a procedural thing, but I just don't understand what his complaint is then. Because if you think the procedural complaint is valid, then okay, then you might lose your seat or whatever happens. But the contention that David Hogg is making is that before he made his announcement about how he was going to be primarying incumbent Democrats, this complaint had already been lodged. And what he was hearing around the DNC, the way he puts it, is that it wasn't going to make it past the committee that would, legitimize it and call for an actual election of the committee. It wasn't going to make it past the credentials committee. And so his argument is that basically the mood and the attitude towards him changed once he made this announcement about primarying incumbent Democrats. So that's obvious. Clearly that was going to happen. But again, this is why I don't understand why Kenyatta is coming out and saying this isn't about David Hogg. It's about what? Some kind of arbitrary rules, squabble that somebody's trying to, they feel that the election was unfair to them, so they're crying foul or whatever. I don't know. It seems to me that it's a more useful narrative that David Hogg is being retaliated against for challenging the party. I think that that's pretty clearly what's happening. And, to try to make a bunch of noise to pull attention away from that is kind of just makes it pointlessly confusing. When ultimately I think both Kenyatta and David Hogg would benefit from people being on their side about this. All of this is to say that while on one hand, this is a story about how David Hogg is challenging the party and he wants to put some fear in the hearts of incumbent Democrats to make them a little bit more useful at very least and primary them if necessary. And the party is punishing him for that. But there is also another story here about the Democrats getting in their own way with these pointless distinctions and these pointless rules-based. I mean, it's complicated to run an election where everybody casts 5 ballots anyway, or 5 different votes. But, this whole idea of breaking it down based on gender, I don't know. Like I said, I see the logic. Is it practical at all? Is it the kind of thing that is going to win people over towards a democratic vision of organizing society? No, not at all. And so we've got to find better ways to approach this. If we're trying to make the the balance of gender in the vice chair position, I think it's there's 1 or 2 women and the rest of them are men. Then there's ways that we can do that, I suppose, maybe in the vetting process for candidates. I don't know. It just seems like a weird direction for the party to go in. I don't think David Hogg is some kind of savior for the party. I think if he gets ousted, he certainly is going to have an opportunity to direct a lot of energy into a different place. And so we'll see. I mean, to me, this brings up interesting questions of, even if we were doing a third party thing, if we were really trying to meaningfully challenge the power of the Democratic Party, which it's not unthinkable that David Hogg would go in that direction if he's to get spurned by them. And right now they behave in a way that makes it clear that they don't really fear that. They don't think that that's a realistic possibility. And in order for any type of real third party to be viable, it would need to have a process, a democratic internal process that could challenge and outpace and ultimately beat this power structure within the DNC, which we all know is what's holding them back. It's the bureaucracy and these, meaningless, pointless infighting and interests that they all are bound to, that basically gets in the way of them being in touch with what people really want to see from them. And even David Hogg is not, he's not guiltless of that, because one of the things that he's accused of, and that he is, being accused of not having good judgment for, is the fact that he was personally compensated by this PAC that he started, and that he used DNC email lists to essentially raise that money, and then he got paid out by the PAC. So not to say all the money that was raised went to him, but he got some kickback from it. And that is the kind of corruption that makes up the entire Democratic Party. So, if David Hogg is really trying to meaningfully challenge power, he needs to distance himself away from that. And somebody like AOC or Bernie Sanders, despite their flaws, which are becoming more and more apparent, every day, I still think they're strong figures because they have avoided that type of weird corporate PAC influence. It's the way the Democratic Party does things, and it gets them all drudged up in this nonsense. And if we are going to meaningfully challenge the power that they currently have, whether it's within the Democratic Party or outside of the Democratic Party, it has to be with a process and a structure that is leaner and more agile than whatever the fuck it is that they're doing over there. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. And if you really want to support, consider becoming a member. That's the best way to support this channel. I'm posting different kinds of stuff there, like podcasts that don't make it to the main channel, book reviews, movie reviews, also music. If you like the music that plays in the back of these podcasts, all that's going to be posted there, as well as my EPs. I just dropped a new EP called Dead Internet Theory, which is now available on all platforms, but it was available first for members only. So if you want early access to future music and projects like that, become a member. And if there's other stuff that you would like to see as members only content, let me know and we'll figure some things out.